Hi everybody, Mr. Rosenleaf here, and I thought this week would be a good time, since we're talking about Congress, to talk about something that happened recently in sort of the context of government shutdowns as a whole. We just got through the longest government shutdown in American history. I believe it was about 41 days, and I know probably some of you may be a little confused by government shutdowns and what that means. So we're going to talk about government shutdowns today. It's just, and sort of also talk about one of Congress's major duties, which is they have what's known as the power of the purse. Congress has the power to tax, spend, borrow, and raise revenue. So they are the ones that, if money is to be spent constitutionally, they're the ones that are supposed to say how that money is spent. Now, have we gotten away from that a little bit in the last few decades? Maybe a little. So we're going to talk about that today. So let's just start with sort of the basic structure of Congress, which is what we call bicameral. Bicameral does not mean they have two cameras and they're doing a web conference or something like that. No, in this case, cameral refers to houses, okay, refers to chambers. And so bicameral would mean then, of course, the prefix bi means two. If we had a unicameral legislature, that would mean we had one house. If we had a tricameral legislature, not entirely sure what that would look like, but if we had a tricameral legislature, it would be three houses. But we have two, a House of Representatives and a Senate, and you see their seals there on your screen. So one of the things that Congress gets to do, as I mentioned before, is they have what is known as the power of the purse. And specifically, if it is a spending bill, if it is money, taxpayer money that is going to be spent, that bill has to originate in the House of Representatives. But why, Mr. Rosenleaf, might you ask? Well, the reason is that the House of Representatives is the most tethered to the people, especially in the view of the founders, framers, whatever you want to call them. Remember that under the original the Constitution as originally written, before any amendments, you had the Senate was actually elected by state legislatures. State governments got to elect the people that sat for that state in the United States Senate, whereas the people have always directly elected their member of the House of Representatives. We can't even say that we technically directly elect the president, because we have that whole electoral college business. But the House of Representatives, we have always directly elected. Now, over the years, the people that elect that person have grown from just white males over the age of 21 who owned property to now any American citizen who has not been convicted of a felony in most states can elect their member of the House of Representatives depending upon where they live in that state. So that's actually Article 1 of the Constitution, Section 7, says that the House gets to originate spending bills. Now, the Senate has a role in this because they actually have to agree to those bills. They have to basically, in order for the spending to happen, they have to pass the exact same bill. And the Senate is supposed to be the more deliberative body. So the House is the one most responsible to the people. The Senate is the one that is supposed to be, as the old saying goes, the Senate is the saucer that cools the House's hot coffee. So the House are the ones that are supposed to get all hot and bothered over whatever the issue of the moment is, and pass some sort of piece of legislation, and then the Senate is supposed to take that and go, whoo, that's hot, and they're supposed to kind of wait on it for a bit and think about it and deliberate about it and then take action on it. They will probably change it. It goes back to the House of Representatives, and the House has to say, yeah, okay, that's fine. And then if the two houses pass the same bill, then it goes to the president to be signed. And again, the bills have to be identical, which is why you will often see things pass the House that then end up stalling in the Senate, or the Senate's like, we don't like that, we need to do this instead, and then they are going to end up going back and forth and back and forth. The other part of this is, of course, the committees in both houses. Both houses have what are known as appropriations committees that are responsible for these spending bills. And so they have a great deal of say as to what these bills do and say. And sometimes if both houses can't agree, so the House has one version of a bill, the Senate has another version of a bill, and one won't give way to the others, then what they're going to do is either the bill fails entirely, or the House leadership and the Senate leadership is going to put together what they call a conference committee. And a conference committee is made up of members of usually the majority party of both houses, at least nowadays. But back when things were more bipartisan, you would see Democrats and Republicans of one house and Democrats and Republicans of another house that had supported the bill. Well, they're going to get together in this committee all together, and they're going to hash out language that they think their house is going to go for. And then it has to go back to both houses. They have to pass them again without amendments. If the Senate decides, I don't like this colon here, it needs to be there, then everything goes back to square one, and the House has to agree, and blah, blah, blah. So, yeah, this is a very complex process. Most bills that are introduced in Congress don't even see the light of a committee hearing, let alone the floor of either house. So, why do shutdowns happen then? Well, shutdowns happen due to missed deadlines, due to the two parties, generally nowadays, not getting along. Again, once upon a time, you would have sort of bipartisanship, or at least alliances across the aisle, and, both parties might form sort of temporary alliances, that members of both parties might form temporary alliances and oppose something or support something. Nowadays, you see one party supporting something, the other party opposing something for the most part. So, these deadlines that we're talking about, and these are deadlines so that come October 1st, the budget is ready and things can progress without any hiccups, without any delays, without a shutdown, right? So in order for that to happen, in early February, the President of the United States, who again is not part of the legislative branch, but he is considered again to be chief legislator, meaning that the President can sort of submit ideas to Congress, or in this case, a full budget. And Congress, then, he will find an ally in Congress to present that budget as a series of bills and hopefully get it passed. Generally, Congress is going to take that budget and go, we like this, we don't like that, etc., etc. So usually that's right around the State of the Union address. So every year the president has to give what's called the State of the Union address, and that's where they sort of outline their big ideas for what the next year will hold. And oftentimes those ideas are sort of bound to, okay, what can we get into the budget to make those things happen, right? So in early February, the president submits the budget. By spring, there should be a budget resolution going on. And that just means that Congress adopts this resolution saying, okay, we sort of have an outline of the total spending we're looking at. We haven't had a chance to hash everything out. It's not a law at this point. It's sort of, for lack of a better term, it's vibes-based. Plan that can be, frankly, adopted or ignored whenever it's convenient or inconvenient, right? But it's a statement of, okay, we have some general ideas in place, and so here's a resolution to sort of start the ball rolling. By June, by the 10th of June is the date. Most of the appropriations, and that should say appropriations, not appropriation. Most of the appropriations bills should be more or less hammered out by June 10th. Okay, that way, all of the math can be done. The Congressional Budget Office and the Office of Management and Budget on the executive branch side can run their numbers and do all of that jazz in order to make sure everything squares. And by June 30th, all of the money that is going to be appropriated should pretty well be appropriated. So that by October 1st, they can sort of polish everything up and stick a bow on it, and here's the budget, and we pass it, and the new fiscal year begins. And I know that's a weird thing. Why does the new fiscal year begin in October? And there are a couple of videos on YouTube about that. I urge you to watch one of them. But yeah, the new fiscal year begins in October, basically due to past Congresses kicking the can down the road. It used to be it started, like you would think, January 1st. But heck, why does the school year start in August instead of in January? It's just the way the cookie crumbles. Now, the last time Congress actually accomplished passing a budget by October 1st in time for the fiscal year was 1997. I was in high school the last time this happened. And I mean, I know I'm like old as the hills, right? So yeah, when I was in high school, and I wasn't even a senior in high school, I'd have been a junior. Yeah, 97, 98, 98, 99. Yeah, I'd have been a junior in high school the last time this happened. So I mean, that in and of itself is pretty crazy. So if, I guess I should go on to the next slide, which is where we talk about this. What if they miss the deadlines? Okay, especially what if October 1st comes and the new, let's say September 28th, and the new fiscal year is, just about to dawn, and we don't have a budget. What happens then? Well, there are really two possibilities in this case. Number one, a government shutdown. The government has no operating budget. If they have no operating budget, they can't do anything. They can't pay people. Offices can't stay open, right? Your second option is a continuing resolution. This is a resolution that can last anywhere from 2 days to 30 days, 60 days, 90 days. Technically, you could have a CR last an entire year. They don't really do that, although I should have looked this up, but as I'm recalling, there was a year where that almost happened. Sometimes, they're pushing this thing back into like March before they can finally get a budget passed. So with a shutdown, one of the big things that happens, we're going to talk more about this in a little bit, but one of the big things that happens is federal workers, unless you are an essential federal worker, which means military, which means air traffic controllers, I think meat inspectors are a part of this, as well as key staff for example, the president, Congress. I'm not sure about the courts. I don't know if the Supreme Court has to furlough its they are called judges, clerks. There we go. I don't know if that happens or not. I didn't think to look that up until just now. But they are furloughed. They are not at work, so things don't happen. And for the most part, if you're a non-essential worker, sometimes when you come back to work, they're going to give you that back pay, but oftentimes that's not going to happen. In fact, that was actually a thing with this last government shutdown that just ended, was, are furloughed workers going to get back pay? Because, this went on for over a month, and I actually haven't heard if that's been settled or not. I think that may end up as a court fight, frankly. And that's just one of the impacts of this. We're going to talk about a lot of them. Continuing resolutions are stopgap funding measures. So they are, again, things to allow the government to function past October 1st. or whenever the last continuing resolution ends. And typically that is either at the current level of funding, or they will work in a percentage or two decrease in funding for like everybody across the board. It just depends on what Congress wants. Again, this is stuff that Congress has to actually get together and pass in order for it to go into effect. And sometimes there's so much arguing over continuing resolution, as there was with this last go around, that we end up in a shutdown anyway. Sometimes they cannot even get together to just agree, hey, let's just keep things going for a while, keep talking. No, they can't even do that sometimes. So this most recent shutdown, October 1st to November 9th, 41 days, longest shutdown in American history. The previous one was 38, I want to say, which was during the first Trump administration back in 2017, 2018, I believe. So after they passed the continuing resolution on November 9th, or that was the date it was signed, so I think they passed it on the 8th or something like that. When the president finally signed it, the government now has money until January 30th, 2026. So this amounts to a little over 2 months that Congress has to try and get itself in gear here to, make this happen. And we'll talk more about continuing resolutions here coming up. So some takeaways, things to sort of think about. Takeaway number one, obviously, is the budgetary power of Congress. Congress controls federal spending, and fights over priorities can stall budgets from happening. In the case of this last government shutdown, it was a fight over one party's desire to trim federal spending, and the other party's desire to save things like subsidies for people who get their health care via the Affordable Care Act, and that party's desire to also restore cuts that had happened to Medicaid, the government insurance program for people who are low income and otherwise cannot afford insurance. So anyway, but in terms of constitutionally here, Article 1, Section 8 gives Congress what's called the power of the purse. It says that Congress says where the money gets spent, not the president, not the judiciary. Congress is the one that makes that call. Now, there can be court cases that will say that a decision that Congress made is unconstitutional, and in that case, yes, the courts can step in and sort of reverse specific things, but ultimately Congress has to say one way or the other. Article 1, Section 9 says that no money shall be drawn from the Treasury but in consequence of appropriations made by law. And appropriations made by law means act of Congress. Okay? Again, the executive can't just say, oh, we're going to spend this money here now. That, if it's specifically devoted to something, the executive has some leeway, but not a lot of leeway to spend that money how they want. If Congress cannot reach an agreement on budgetary priorities, delays can happen. And like I said, we haven't had an on-time budget since 1997. 97, 2007, 2017. We're going on nearly 30 years here. Basically this can vote now. But anyway, so again, the most recent government shutdown was about healthcare subsidies primarily and cuts to federal spending. So takeaway number 2 is that the partisanship in Congress can often delay or completely prevent the passage of a budget. It blocks cooperation, and this has been seen in multiple shutdowns, the last 4 that we have had. And the first one that I remember in my many years was in the middle of the 90s. And I didn't think to look back and see when that had previously happened. But two of the last three government shutdowns have revolved around funding for healthcare. Both the most recent one and what was the other one? Oh, the one back in the Obama administration, 2013, were both about healthcare funding, in particular, funding for the Affordable Care Act and subsidies for people purchasing coverage within the Affordable Care Act. The 95-96 shutdown, which is the first one I remember, which was actually two straight shutdowns. There was one in 95, and they had a few days where they tried to make it work sort of over New Year's, and then it started again shortly after the New Year started. So it was two government shutdowns, December 22nd, 2018 to January 25th, 2019. And this was, or no, I'm sorry, that was 2018, 2019, my bad. The 95-96 shutdown was November 95 to January 96. There we go, my apologies. So this one was, again, back-to-back shutdowns, and this was a power struggle between then-President Bill Clinton, who I understand is now sort of part of a joke thing, although as what I hear is that is not actually the case. But between Bill Clinton and a guy named Newt Gingrich, who was Speaker of the House at the time, the House wanted to majorly cut spending and have policy changes, particularly around Medicare and domestic programs. President Clinton refused to sign the budget, and he accused the Congress of holding essential services hostage to push through ideological cuts to the budget. Both sides were unwilling to blink, leading to two shutdowns with a continuing resolution sort of in the middle there. And what ended up happening was that public opinion swung very hard away from Congress, what Congress was trying to do, and the Republicans end up compromising to reopen the government. Oftentimes, both sides will end up compromising. That did not happen with this last government shutdown. But typically, there's a little give on both sides. But like with this most recent government shutdown, Democrats were refusing to budge on cuts to the Affordable Care Act, and they also wanted to restore cuts to Medicaid. And the Republicans wouldn't even negotiate with them. And eventually, 8 members of the Democratic caucus, 7 Democrats and 1 independent, will end up going to the Republicans behind the rest of their caucus's back and basically negotiating a deal to sign on to the budget and not continue the fight. The rest of the caucus was not real happy about this. Neither was really the rest of the Democratic Party. And I just pulled some other cartoons. You saw the one on the last slide from the Obama years, basically looking at both Obama and then Speaker of the House John Boehner, both with giant keys, who say that, yours won't fit, even though the lock is teeny tiny. So, yeah, neither one of the keys would fit anyway. But you also see this one was from the 2018 shutdown, which actually revolved around funding for President Trump, who was in his first term at that point, around the border wall with Mexico. And this was the major sticking point. And on that, actually, there ended up being a compromise, but largely the Republicans sort of caved on this, and Trump at least did not get a lot of what he was asking for. But this one actually talks about government workers not being able to get back to work, essentially, or have access to their paychecks, which was a big thing. And then the wind-up toy not being able to do any work because he's out of budgetary turns. In other words, the Democrats and the Republicans blaming each other as the subject of both of the cartoons there on the bottom. So takeaway number 3 are continuing resolutions. Please bear in mind, continuing resolutions are not budgets. Those are agreements to continue either the present level of funding or some variant thereof. No changes in policies or anything like that are supposed to happen. It's basically supposed to be status quo or like a 1% cut or something like that. They are not a budget, they are a budgetary extension. These things can last from a few days to months. 30 to 90 days is somewhat typical. But this leads to tremendous uncertainty. It leads to uncertainty for federal workers. Are we going to be furloughed again if we've already had a shutdown? And that's something that federal workers are dealing with right now. Is we just got through the longest shutdown in government history. If these sides don't bend a little bit to get a budget passed in January, are we going to end up going without a paycheck yet again? So temporary relief really gives way to future nightmares. This is truly kicking the can down the road, as you see in the cartoon. The current continuing resolution will only last a little over 2 months. And then we're back to the drawing board. And during that time, for at least part of it, Congress is on vacation. So, what's going to happen there? Are we going to see another government shutdown? Are we going to see another attempt at major cuts? That is something that happened this time that hadn't happened in previous government shutdowns, is the executive actually took it upon himself to try and unilaterally actually fire what he felt were useless government employees in various departments. So, what's that going to look like? If you were a federal worker, you'd have to be a little worried there. Actually, federal workers during this last shutdown, you saw like air traffic. Well, we're going to talk about that in a minute. Anyway, so the impacts of the shutdown. The biggest ones that the public gets to see are things like national parks, essential agencies, services are either closed or severely delayed. Federal workers are furloughed, funding is cut off. Federal workers don't always get back pay on this. And we're also talking about like grant funding, where the workers aren't necessarily government workers, but their salaries are covered by government money. And so if you're a research scientist or something like that at a university, and your entire budget and your salary is covered by a government grant, well, potentially that grant money didn't go out last month. What are the impacts of that sort of thing? Government services can slow down or even stop, which becomes a real problem. If you were trying to get a passport during the shutdown, if you were trying to process a grant application or something like that, you saw those things very much slow down, if not even stop. And that leads to then when things do start back up again, you have this massive backlog if you're a federal employee of stuff you need to take care of. Food inspections get reduced. Research is disrupted. Imagine being a research scientist and your lab shuts down, and maybe you are running an experiment that has to be monitored every single day, and you're not allowed back in the building. You cannot, as a federal worker, just volunteer your time. That's illegal. You can get arrested. So imagine coming back and you've been running this experiment for 5-6 months, and maybe it's a year-long experiment and it hasn't been monitored in 41 days, and you have to start all over. I mean, that's the kind of stuff that can happen. Delay or reduction in funding for programs like WIC, we saw that in this shutdown. SNAP benefits, this was a major problem right near the end of the shutdown, as government funding for SNAP ended on the 1st of November, and we still didn't have a budget in place, and we still didn't have a continuing resolution. And so much of the funding that gets used to feed underprivileged people comes from the federal government, comes from Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, aka SNAP. For pregnant women and women with small children, a lot of funding comes from the Women and Infant Children Program, WIC. And those funds did not get released, and so a lot of people were thinking, gee, what are we going to do? How are we going to feed ourselves? Because a lot of these people that are on these programs still work full time, but they don't make enough money to meet all of their daily needs. That's a whole nother discussion. I'm not going to go there, but Still, this was a major issue. And again, during the recent shutdown, the executive, the president, did try to permanently fire some workers. Some of that stuff has been reversed. Some of it is still in courts. But again, furloughs for federal workers, delayed paychecks, or even if you're furloughed, potentially no paycheck at all. Now, the president had signed in his first term a thing saying that you would get back pay, and then he sort of backtracked on that. We don't know how that's going to end up working out. Government services delayed, federal grants, reimbursements paused for schools, states, nonprofits. This puts a lot of businesses and a lot of institutions in jeopardy. We're going to talk more about impacts to our economy, threats to public health and safety, and this is in the middle of, we're still seeing like a measles outbreak in the South, things like that. Law enforcement continues, but without administrative support. And again, if you think about like air traffic controllers, they had to go to work. The military had to go to work. Now, they fixed military pay fairly early on so that the troops would continue to get paychecks, because that looks really bad if the troops aren't getting paychecks. But air traffic controllers didn't get paychecks despite the fact that they had to continue showing up to work. So many of them started calling in sick and taking jobs as like Uber drivers and food deliverers and things like that, because without any money coming in, they still have to make their bills for the month. To quote a recent episode of South Park, have to get my nut. So the picture there, that is actually from Grand Teton National Park in Wyoming. I tried to find one from Montana, I couldn't. But this is a road into Grand Teton just completely closed off. They weren't letting people in there anymore because they didn't have people to monitor the park. Federal workers. So hundreds of thousands of federal workers get furloughed in the event of a government shutdown. Everybody from administrative assistants to scientists to, again, the only people that don't get furloughed are absolutely essential government workers. Obviously, the president remains at work. Congress continues to get paid. That's a whole nother discussion we can have if you want. But like air traffic controllers are continue to get paid. I think meat inspections keep happening. So there are some essential services that do continue to get paid, but largely federal workers are SOL basically. Furloughed workers, again, are supposed to be guaranteed back pay, but in this last shutdown, that became an issue, and I have not heard the resolution of that. There's a huge backlog of work once the federal government reopens. Scientific research is sometimes lost or delayed because you come back and you either have a lot of data to enter, or you didn't have anybody to collect the data. So, poof, all gone. The military needed a special workaround. They did work that out because harming the troops is really politically unpopular. But again, think about air traffic controllers, that there was no special workaround for them, and they started like calling in sick to work. Economic costs of a shutdown are huge. You see the frozen federal spending, because the federal government spends a lot of money, and that actually goes into people's pockets, and that becomes part of a figure known as the gross domestic product. And so for the quarter that shutdown is going on, if it lasts more than a few days, you are going to see a dip in the gross domestic product, which could look like sort of a mini recession, which no leader wants to see, because you always, if you're in power, you want the economy to look as good as possible on your watch. That way people like you and they want to re-elect you. So this can drag down GDP, obviously lost productivity as people that are funded by the federal government or federal workers are not at work, so things can't get done. Consumer confidence goes way down, and we're already struggling with that. Okay, so if consumer confidence falls, people don't necessarily want to go out and spend money, and our economy is reliant on people going out and spending money. And it has been since the 1920s. We shifted over from a manufacturing-based economy to a consumer economy, where we are reliant upon people spending money, shelling out money for products and services in order for our economy to grow. If people stop spending money, we're in trouble. Okay, so if consumer confidence falls, people go, maybe I shouldn't buy that new Nintendo Switch. Maybe I shouldn't buy, the good quality ground beef. Maybe I should get the stuff that has the sawdust in it. And things can get bad. Delays in loan, permit, grant approvals. So this can hurt businesses who are waiting for approval on a loan, maybe a government-backed loan for certain industries, and they can't get that, and maybe they can't make payroll that month. Disruption in travel and tourism, you saw near the end of the most recent shutdown, where the Federal Aviation Administration and the Department of Transportation were starting to cancel flights going between major airports, or to major airports and from major airports, because they didn't have enough air traffic controllers, because the shutdown had gone on so long that air traffic controllers were starting to call in sick to work so that they could go work other jobs. And so they had to start cutting back on flights, which is not good. That's no bueno. And tourism. You don't particularly want to travel. I know I canceled a trip to Seattle for a follow-up on my kidney transplant because I did not want to fly during the government shutdown. The shutdown ended a couple days before I was scheduled to go, but I had still already put off that trip until top of next month. And finally, market volatility. Stock markets don't tend to like things that are unpredictable. Now, interestingly, during this last shutdown, you actually saw the stock market tick up. There's really no predicting the stock market, but usually you see market volatility as one of the things that happens during shutdowns. So again, past shutdowns, 95, I'm doing the last about 4. 95, 96, again, was Clinton and Gingrich over spending cuts to Medicare and other what Clinton felt were essential government programs, aid for education, things like that, and which the Republican Party at the time sought to cut because they felt it was waste. 2013, the Republican Party sought to defund the Affordable Care Act, also known as Obamacare. That was ultimately unsuccessful. 2018, 2019, President Trump wanted funding for the border wall that ultimately, I think, ended up with without doing much of that funding, if any at all. The government reopened without that funding. And then, of course, the 2025 shutdown, the one that we just ended, was again about deep cuts to domestic programs and new border security conditions. But primarily it was about what the Democrats were fighting for were continued subsidies for people who get insurance via the ACA, who don't get the benefit of having an employer provided plan or, a cost sharing with an employer, and trying to restore cuts to Medicare or Medicaid, excuse me. So that was what ended up happening there. And again, that ended because 8 people in the Democratic caucus in the Senate backed down. The picture on your screen, by the way, there on the right-hand side, that is former President Bill Clinton. Not then former, he is currently president in that picture. And on the left-hand side, that is Newt Gingrich, the then Speaker of the House, who will go on to run for president in 2012, I want to say. He didn't do very well. And the last takeaway here is just brinksmanship, because government shutdowns are all about brinksmanship. Who is going to cave first? Who is going to give up? And in the case of our most recent shutdown, 8 members of the Democratic Party blinked first. But political games, which is what brinksmanship is basically, don't end up hurting politicians. They end up hurting the public. They end up hurting everyday people. This harms trust in government. Now, this has been falling over many, many years. Our low trust in government is not just due to government shutdowns. Let me be very clear. But just to give you an example, in 1964, just after the Kennedy assassination, public trust in government hit its highest point of the 20th century, where 77% of Americans said that they could trust government all of the time or most of the time. Now, it's fluctuated over the years, but over the last about 20 years, that number has fallen precipitously. And in 2024, so last year, only 22% of Americans could say the same thing. Only 22% of Americans could say that they trust the government all of the time or most of the time. That's a heck of a drop-off. This brinksmanship, these government shutdowns make planning way more difficult. Planning for institutions, planning for government employees, planning for outfits that rely upon government funding. Everybody from defense contractors to universities to conservation boards, et cetera, et cetera. When that flow of money stops, then they have to pivot and try and do other things. And that's not so easy, especially when you're not really planning for it. Predictability in government is actually very, very important for things to function as they are supposed to function. We are now facing a government trying to catch up on things that it missed over those 41 days. And in the past, we've had the same thing. During the last shutdown, during the shutdown over the Affordable Care Act, during the shutdown in the 90s, you had a government trying to catch back up on things, and sometimes you can't catch back up. And that ends up harming, again, not necessarily the politicians, in fact, very rarely the politicians. It ends up harming people like you and me. Like for you guys, for example, some of you may have already started filling out your free applications for federal student aid for college. The processing of those has been delayed and will continue to be delayed as the president has continued the dismantling of the Department of Education. So all of those offices are now being shifted to other parts of the government, and that's going to take time too. So when you go, if you are going to college, when you go to apply for your FAFSA, your student loans basically, you're going to be dealing potentially with delays in that. So in any case, shutdowns are avoidable when compromise happens. But this requires both sides, and that should be both, not bot sides, to behave like adults and work for the betterment of the country. And oftentimes that doesn't always happen. Sometimes it's both parties, sometimes it's one party, the other party, but oftentimes it's more about political vanity than anything else, which is truly sad. So in your reflection journals this week, I just want you to think about what needs to happen to avoid future government shutdowns. Just give me a nice few sentences about that. Just, put your thinking caps on, try and think outside the box. Also, this week, as next week is Thanksgiving, and I'm not going to make a video before then, since I'm just finishing this one and it's Thursday. I'm offering you a little treat here. If you write at the bottom of your entry in the journal the words gobble, 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 I will award you 5 points of extra credit on this assignment as a little Thanksgiving treat. Just a little nip of pumpkin pie, if you will, or a little spoonful of mashed potatoes. All right. I wish you, your family, your loved ones a very happy Thanksgiving, since I will not get to talk to you next week unless you stop into my room. Also, fair warning, I am going to be out on the 1st of December on that trip to Seattle. So I will see everybody on December 2nd. Thank you so much. Have a great day. Bye-bye.